Hi, and welcome to Nerdiest Prime. We are reviewing every episode of Star Trek Picard. Today we are doing Season 3, Episode 8, Surrender. What did we think of this episode? Let's start with Namir.
I didn't like it that much, which is surprising to me. I feel like as we go on, I'm getting a little bit harsher, but it's starting to dovetail for me. So I'm liking some parts of it, but other parts of it are starting to really grate on me, and we can talk about that. But I wasn't a big fan of this episode, which I will say I was surprised about. I really wanted to like it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna like it, and then I didn't, and I was like, oh, that's strange, but I didn't feel good about it.
I agree. This one was it's more wheel spinning, which frustrated me. The Jack stuff not being answered after they teased it at the end of the previous episode bothered me. But there were so many good moments between the TNG cast that it saved it for me. Like I still had a good time based solely on that. But plot wise, I'm getting bummed out that we're not moving forward.
Yeah, I like this episode, not as much as the other ones, but as I've been saying, I feel like every episode is building on the last episode, so it's kind of a continuing storyline. So I'm not really seeing a huge difference. I'm just seeing a continuation of the same storyline. I'm enjoying the storyline. I like what's going on. Nothing has been really, answered, and so I'm a little frustrated with that. As Alan's saying, there's this Jack Crusher stuff that's not really being we thought I thought by this episode we would know what was going on, and there's only 2 episodes left, and now, anyways, we'll talk about it some more. But now I feel like this is actually leading into a backdoor pilot kind of situation. I mean, I think that conversation was there because the writers had decided for whatever reason that they wanted Riker to show up early in the season without Troy, and they needed to explain why Troy was there. So they invented this cockamamie like the marriages are falling apart, and then they needed this whole conversation to explain why their marriage had fallen apart because we had seen them happily married in season 1, and it was okay. And I think there's a lot of that going on in this season of wrapping up loose ends or explaining things.
One of the problems that I had with this episode was there was a lot of people talking about their feelings out loud, and that tends to happen in TV shows, but and you can kind of forgive some of it, but there was a lot of it in this one. Like, I feel this, I feel this because I'm sad, and so that entire scene between Riker and Troy was all of that. And I'm watching it thinking, is this not the first time you guys talked about any of this? Like, this is the first time since your son died that you talked about any of this, really. This is why your relationship is breaking down, because you're not communicating.
I was a little confused by the timeline on this thing because I'm not sure when the son passed away, and I'm like, it seems like they're addressing a lot of stuff that I thought had happened like maybe a decade in the past. I'm not quite sure. 'Cause I'm like, oh, like is he angry at her for blocking out his grief or whatever she was doing for him empathically? And I'm like, has she been doing this for like how long? And
Right, but I didn't want them to talk about that. Like what I wanted to see was them being in the same jail cell and not getting along, and then working together to sort of escape. And because of them working together, that sort of brings them to back on the same page again.
it was way too easy to rescue them. It went from Troy and Riker in peril to then suddenly they're just hanging out and Worf shows up and stabs that guy. And I'm like, oh, I thought there'd be more to this.
Like, he just appeared out of nowhere.
And was he walking behind that guy? Like, how come they didn't notice his approach? I don't know. Like, they're like, Worf! He's like, he's shadowing.
I think he was just there the whole time. The entire time they were in the jail cell, just Worf was on the other end, just standing perfectly still like Drax, so that he seemed invisible.
He's like, I gotta make a cool entrance.
And the best part of that scene was after the bad guy gets stabbed, and they don't notice that it's Worf. They watch the bad guy fall down, and they turn to look back, and they're like, "Oh, it's Worf." It's like you can see that right away.
How'd you miss a 6.5 foot Klingon standing behind that guy? But yeah, I was like, I really thought there'd be some more peril, like he'd be tortured and she'd be tortured, and they would have to work out a clever escape plan. And I don't know what Riker was thinking either when he said, "Oh, I'm sure Jean-Luc has a clever plan all cooked up." I'm like, he hasn't had a clever plan all season, and you've been standing behind him the whole time.
And in fact, you kicked him off the bridge for his bad planning. I really hated that everything about the hostage crisis. I thought it was silly. It didn't really make a lot of sense. You know, they've got, I don't even know how many of those little creatures, the little, District 9 type creatures she's got on that ship. I assume lots. Why don't they just look for him? She has control over the entire ship. They can just, use a computer to find people.
Yeah, this was probably the weakest part of the episode. It was not terribly well done, because again, we've seen in Star Trek before they could put some Neurazine gas throughout the ship and knock everybody out, and just then go room to room till they find them. Like there's established things in Star Trek where this kind of hide and seek and I can't find you on the ship would not work.
One of the things that I really like about Star Trek, and you've heard this from me before, is that it's not Star Wars because it's smart, capable people doing smart things for the most part, right? And I think that's when Star Trek is its best, right? And it works well because they're within a a sort of a military organization, and they follow the rules, and they have procedures, and they're capable people. None of that was on display in this episode. They take over the ship, and all of the other crew that are still in the hallway just start running around like their heads are on fire. They're like, I don't know what to do, and they're just running into the bad guys, and the bad guys are shooting them. They're not trying to like mount a defense. They're not leaning on any of their supposed training at all to try and take back the ship, and that's what I wanted to see.
The fact that the previous episode established Jack as this kind of super soldier type fighter who could just take control of someone and get into all sorts of crazy kung fu and just take out like 4 shapeshifters or changelings like that. And this time he just he takes the control of that one guy and then he just runs down the hall and gets shot. I'm like, this isn't showing any of the talents that he had in the previous episode.
And I like how there's no remorse on his part for doing that. He's like, that guy was like, getting it together. He was like, he found a safe spot. And he's like, oh, I'm okay. And then the next thing he knows, he's like in the middle of the hall in front of one of the bad guys. He's like, what am I doing here? And then he gets shot and killed. And Jack's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and he just gave up. He's like, oh, I can't get out of this room. I'm like, that's all I can do. I took control of one guy and he got shot. I'm like, I'm all out of ideas.
So the only thing that I thought was good about that scene was that Amanda Plummer is really good. So if you're gonna have a scene like that and you're gonna just reenact like Alan Rickman at Nakatomi Plaza, well, Amanda Plummer as Hans Gruber it's a pretty good choice. Yeah, it was a good time.
And then they did the whole usual thing where they do the lineup and it's like, oh, who's gonna die, and then, and then I guess our Vulcan science officer is no more now, which is too bad. I liked her.
I'm going to get to the best part, or my favorite part of the episode, which is Data versus Lore, which I thought was, on one hand, kind of predictable, and it's also really hard to dramatize like 2 computers fighting for dominance. But I thought they did a really good job of doing that thing in the void. And there wasn't really a second where I was like, Data's dead. I guess Laura took over. There was just like, okay, there's a thing happening here.
It's like a concert encore. It's like, come on, you're coming out for another song. It's like, just come out here and play. Stop making us wait. I got a car to get back to and try to beat the traffic.
I like that but and this is something I really like about this season is they're so accurate about bringing back these things like the hat and the pipe and the little Tasha Yar hologram and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, anything that I'm just a sucker for any time they flash back or pull in the original series. Um, so I that's my favorite part of this episode as well. I thought they did that extremely well, and I like that you know they at least tried to fake you out, but everybody knows that it's not a fake out and Data's okay. But the act of it and going through it was just a lot of fun because it's going to happen, right? Data's going to win out in the end, and you're just waiting for it. And you're like, he's handing things to Lore, and Lore's like, "Oh, I'm winning," and you're like, "You're not winning. You're gonna get screwed in the end. It's gonna be great."
That was our TNG cameo for this week. It was like we got not only Tasha Yar, but we got Spot. Spot come back. Who thought Spot was gonna be in here?
Yeah, I know. I can't believe that cat lived for like 25 years. It's amazing.
As a memory, he could live forever.
You had talked about last week, Alan, about there was some real TNG moments, like in the exchanges of the characters. And when Data came back and he was talking, but it was like an evolved version of Data. Basically, he's become fully human. It was like, oh, that's a really nice culmination of his journey after all these years. And especially that he didn't really get a chance to do that. Like, that's where I've always wanted to see him. I imagine everybody's wanted to see him finally become human. Like, if his arc is Pinocchio, well, now he's a little boy.
Yeah, Data has a way of saving. He has a way of saving like every episode he's in, or every storyline he's in. He's just always so good. And you're right. Like, it's not just having an emotion chip. Like he's actually a real person now, which is kind of an interesting switch because he's funny, right? And he uses contractions, even though he uses contractions all the time. But he uses contractions now. Like he's a totally different. He's a variation of all the other versions. But he's like the final form. Like he's like the last Pikachu, right? He's turned into its final form.
That's what elevated this episode for me. So my eyes didn't completely roll out of my head. Was all the Data stuff, because the face off against Lore. Like I was getting all like, my eyes were getting a little moist and everything, and then I was like saw Spot, and I was like, oh, and I'm like, and he hugs Lore, and I'm like, oh, and then Geordi says, how do you feel? And he's like, I feel, and I'm like, oh, like I just got all warm and fuzzies through all this stuff, and I was like, that was all great.
Okay, so is Vanek really dead? Because she's a changeling. Do changelings need oxygen? Can they survive in space?
That's the only way this show works, is the fact that the changelings in their solid form are vulnerable because they have organs and are partially organic from the experiments. So I guess she had her organic form solidified and shattered, like any kind of humanoid.
Okay, by the way I love that part of the hostage scene was that the little thermo detonator is actually a shield, and then them blasting them out into space. We're like, that answers the question that Alan asked last year about why is there a airlock on the bridge.
I thought exactly that. I still think it's a stupid concept, but I thought, I was like, wow, they have not acknowledged that there's an airlock on the bridge since The Naked Now in the first season when he's had their blowout party. I was like, because I'm like, it still seems kind of dumb. Like that's like a really vulnerable thing to have on a bridge with all your senior staff and I mean, I guess it's good in this scenario when your bridge has been compromised by an opposing force, but I feel like it's still like something that an opposing force could also easily take advantage of. And just like, okay, goodbye, command crew. It's like we just type a few buttons and you.
But the bridge is in a weird spot too because it's on top of the saucer section, right? So that's literally the most vulnerable part of the entire ship, right? And it sticks up like like a pimple.
Well, they do that in Enterprise too. Like in like the third season of Enterprise, they do their alternate future and they're losing to the Zindi just focus all their weapons on the bridge and just blow them all up, and then everybody gets sucked out. And they're all dead.
They're like, where should we shoot? Oh yeah, that really obvious bump there with the windows. Let's just shoot there. We're gonna get somebody.
And I like they finally acknowledged that after like 5 series, is they finally said, "Oh, that'd probably be a good place for the enemy to focus their fire."
Yeah, and I like how the airlock was behind the view screen, because the view screen opens up, and then everybody gets sucked out. You're like, oh yeah, that's why you don't see like an actual hatch anywhere. It's behind the view screen.
Fucking solids is like my new favorite line from New Trek.
That's the one thing that throws me off is you guys were just probably talking about this, but it's the swearing. Every time they swear, I'm just like, that doesn't belong in Star Trek. What's this doing here? You know, this isn't Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like a dad trying to swear around his teenage kids to be cool or something. That's what it feels like. You're like,
it always feels very shoehorned.
You don't have to swear. You don't have to make yourself swear.
They keep trying to drop the F-bomb in Star Trek, and it's always really awkward, but I like that one. Like every other time they try to use it, I'm like, oh, do not use the F word in Star Trek. You're not doing a good job with it. But Vadic's exit was very, very nice. I feel like they are going towards the Borg, because there was that one line that Vadic says, and she said when Seven jumped onto the bridge to be with her and Jack, and it's like, you might as well be here too. You'll be interested in this or whatever she says, because of who you are. And I'm like, oh, they're gonna reveal that he has something to do with the Borg, and that's why Seven will find this interesting.
I'm gonna be very disappointed if that's what it is.
And the ancient evil part of it, that's when I was like, oh, are they gonna like explain the origins of the Borg, and is that why Seven is gonna be interested in this?
There's actually another line that Jack says where I'm like, oh, that's kind of a Borgy thing to say, because he's like, so when he's got the shield detonator, right, and he's threatening them, and he's like, don't bother resisting. And it feels weird, like it doesn't fit. And you're like, oh, that's just another way of saying resistance is futile.
I didn't notice that, but yeah. I feel like they're dropping in some Borg hints.
They are. And it may be like, maybe they're being clever and they're trying to like, misdirect you. But I don't think so. I think, Alan, you said that, you just said that this is like the origins of the Borg. And I think you might be right. I think that's what they're trying to do is like, where did the Borg come from?
Oh, that's what I think. I think that the goo hand thing is Armis.
Armis created the Borg.
So what's behind the red door? What do you guys think? This is the last thing.
Oh, it's Locutus. I was like, they got the red light coming through the keyhole. I'm thinking about Locutus with his red laser.
I think whatever was causing the Aramonic syndrome is whatever they implanted in him to keep a program or something to keep the original creator of the Borg alive. And so it got passed down. It's like possession, right? So it just gets passed down to Jack. I think I'm going to be a little bit hard on this episode because I didn't like it. I'm going to give it a 5. 5. Lowest rating yet for season 3 Picard.
We spun our wheels again. It kind of built a promise last week that didn't to reveal all, and it didn't. But again, it was elevated by the TNG stuff, all the data, lore, Geordi getting the gang back together, all hit me right there. So I'll give this one a 7 again.
Even though this episode was a little weaker, it's still continuing the story that I'm really enjoying, and there was these amazing TNG moments, and Data's back, and all that. So, give it a solid 7 out of 10.
Wouldn't they want to go back to the ship, and then get Picard's body?
They saw that it already had what they needed extracted from his brain, and then so the rest was just like, it's just the body.
And when they show Picard's body, you can see like the little empty area where his junk should be. It's like smooth. Like a Ken doll. There's nothing there. It was like, was he always like that? Yeah. Oh, interesting.
They took that too.
They put it in like a little jar of formaldehyde.
They need his ball sack, and his brain. That's all they need.